Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. You know, outdoor humorist Patrick F. McManus once said, it is common knowledge that the average idiot can flip a smoldering cigarette butt out of the window of a moving vehicle and burn down half a national forest, but when you really need a fire, you can't get one going with a bundle of dry kindling and a blowtorch. Now, while that's obviously an exaggeration, it does underscore two important points pertaining to outdoor recreation and fires. One, fire is something we need to be careful with, need to keep under control, but two, building a fire in adverse conditions can sometimes be a challenge. And yet it's perhaps one of the most important skills that an outdoorsman can have, especially out here in Idaho where it can snow in any month of the year. I can remember at least two occasions in the last couple of years when I've been caught in a snowstorm in the middle of July while hiking in the mountains. Fortunately, both times I was able to get a fire going, and I don't know if that, strictly speaking, saved my life, but it certainly warded off excessive discomfort as I weathered the storm and allowed me to get back to the car in much better shape than I might have otherwise. So I'd like to take a minute today to just discuss some fire building techniques and some things that have worked for me, and hopefully that will work for you as well. You know, whenever possible, I like to try and use natural fire starter, things that I can harvest in the field wherever I happen to be to get a fire going. That way I don't have to worry about keeping a supply of special fire starter, from the store or from some manufacturing plant with me at all times. And there's a variety of materials that occur naturally in most camping areas that make excellent fire starter. One of them, in many mountainous areas, especially if you've got a lot of timber around, you'll find this bushy lichen. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's more of a drab green growing on the trees. Many times I've used that for fire starter to excellent effect. Out here by the lake, I found some of these giant burrs growing around. They're dry from last year, and these, because of their thin spines, these also burn very well. Sometimes the dry tufts of leftover sagebrush flowers are another fire starter material that I've used on occasion. Dry pine needles, if they're dry, burn very well. If they're damp, not so much. This is actually a little damp because we did have a snowstorm this morning. Of course, in April, that's not unusual. But they're thin enough that once heated, they'll actually dry out and burn fairly easily. As you can see, that ignites fairly readily, and if I had a pile of them here, I could use that to get an initial fire going enough to dry out some small twigs and get them to ignite. However, in the worst of weather, you're not going to be able to find any natural substance that's dry enough and flammable enough to actually get a fire going in a reasonable amount of time. And so carrying some emergency fire starter is always a good idea. One thing that I almost always carry when I'm out hiking in the mountains are some scraps of tar paper. This stuff is totally waterproof. It burns very well. It's light, it's compact, it's easy to carry. An excellent material to stick in your survival kit. In use, just tear up a few strips of the stuff, crumple up the strips, make a little pile, and then light them and use them just like you would any other fire starter material. It does make a nasty black smoke when it burns, so you probably don't want to breathe the fumes, but if you need to get a fire going in an emergency, it's definitely a handy material to have on hand. However, for a worst-case scenario where everything is soaked and you really need a long-lasting, intense flame to dry out some sizable sticks and get them to ignite, there are a few things that can compete with a highway safety flare. And that's the main thing that I wanted to demonstrate this evening. Now, like I said, this wood was already a little damp from our snowstorm this morning, but just to make my point, I'm going to dump some water on it before I try to light it with the highway flare. Alright, so now we've got a pile of very wet firewood. Let's see if we can get this to light. It may take a while for the heat of the flare to dry out and then ignite the wet wood. However, these highway flares are rated to burn for 15 minutes, so we've got a quarter of an hour to do that. When I get this in the computer, I'll speed it up so you don't have to sit here and wait for a quarter of an hour to see the fire going. So at this point, the flare has burned itself out, but as you can see by now, we've got a nice blaze going, despite starting with some very wet wood. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.